My name's Peter Stonham, and I'd like to welcome you to the second online discussion in our series. We're running about 5 steps forward for the Civic Revival. I'm the chairman of Civic Revival and one of the founders with Richard Walker, who you'll also be hearing from this evening. We had a very good introductory discussion last month when we looked at mapping the territory on which we're planning to build a manifesto embracing the civic values and objectives that we would like to put in front of those standing for council elections next May as a prompt for their commitment to genuine localism and citizen empowerment. We hope to put that in front of all the candidates, but in particular, we're hoping there'll be a big slate of candidates next May with a banner of genuine independent local representation on both the existing district and county councils, but also in particular town and parish councils. We've got people here tonight who are working to that end, and we want to share ideas and experiences about how genuine local citizen empowerment is achieved. We can learn from one another and I hope draw support from the fact that although people are doing this mission in different parts of the country, there are some very distinctive core values and core principles that we're all sharing. Our session will be led again tonight by Nick Waits, who's our resident participation and shared decision-making expert with a long pedigree and a set of publications on that very subject. And alongside him, Peter McFadden, who pioneered the independent takeover of Frome Council in Somerset 8 years ago and has developed the concept of what he calls flat pack democracy, on which he's written 2 books, which are the textbook for people wanting to replicate the achievements he and his colleagues made in Frome. We've got an excellent lineup of other people from around the country who will speak on their own situations and ambitions, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion tonight. That's all I need to say. So I hope we have a very good discussion. And I'd now like to hand over to you, Nick and Peter.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Well, I suppose I spent most of my life as a civic activist, setting up and being involved in what I'd call third sector organisations, community associations, action groups, development trusts, and allotment associations. And I have mostly ignored councils on the grounds that they never seem to be addressing the concerns that my local organisations and my neighbourhood associations were interested in. And it's recently that I realised that was a big omission, really, in certainly my attention. And so it's been very exciting for me to discover flat pack democracy. And I'm very excited at having a conversation tonight with Peter McFadden, who has been so instrumental in getting that started. So really, without further ado, I'd just like to ask Peter, what is flat pack democracy and why now?
Thank you. So I'm going to say very little about this because there's some serious expertise and experience in this virtual room. So I will answer Nick's opening question or whatever, but as briefly as I can, really, which will be very brief, because our plan really is for this to be a very wide discussion, because what's the range of people in the on this call have had different experiences of doing similar things, have taken some of the ideas that we had in Frome, and also have come at this from a very different viewpoint. So we want to look at it in that way. the very brief bit, for those of you who don't know this, is that 10 years ago, I got involved in Froome's Town Council, having never done anything political, having approached this very much like Nick, having been involved forever in sort of community organisations, transition town movement and so on, and always stayed as well clear of town council as I could. And where I happened to rub up against it, had just thought, blimey, that's very boring, I'm not going there again. And that was part of the motivation for us as a group. We were a set of individuals who'd never actually met each other particularly. I mean, we weren't a bunch of friends, but we arrived at a point where some of us at least knew austerity was about to happen, where Frome had political parties, so Froome's a town of 27,000, so it was big enough for people to stand under political parties for the council. And they spent their time bickering, or a lot of their time arguing along party political lines and bickering with each other and not doing much else. And that's my view, obviously. They would probably disagree. And we also knew localism was coming. So we kind of went, hey, look, we've got a really uninspiring bunch of people doing not very much. We've got austerity coming, so we're going to get stuffed if we don't do things ourselves. And we've got localism, which is going to give loads of power to people at the local level. So that combination made us think, initially, let's have fun and see if we can stir this up, because we're only talking about 3 or 4 months before a local election. And then 3 or 4 months later, 75% more people had voted, and 10 of us out of 17 were councillors. And so we ran Frome Town Council, and then proceeded to demolish the rules, because it turned out that a lot of what people think are rules aren't rules. And by just being kind of devil's advocate to a lot of things and just asking lots of questions, we found that a lot of what appeared to be rules, as I say, aren't. They're guidance. There are rules, and of course they need to be stuck to about accounting for the money and so on. But there are very few of them. So particularly around the formal side of councils and the traditional side, that was all stuff that we could get rid of as quickly as possible, which we did. And I suppose the 2 key elements of this was that we said, we're a group of individuals who will work together in this way. So we we put together an ethos, what we call a way of working. So this is how we'll behave with each other, which was incredibly useful in keeping people of very disparate politics and views and ideas together and focused on what Frome needed, not what we disagreed on, which I would say is what characterizes normal party politics in general. So we said, this is how we work, and we will do loads more participatory democracy. We'll do a lot more going out to the people. We'll have a lot more what we call panels. They could be now, for those of you who have had anything to do with Extinction Rebellion, they'd characterize them as people's assemblies, but people coming together to say what they want. So we used that very much. Our thought was that we don't know very much, actually. So for instance, we knew nothing about sport. Loads of people in Frome knew about sport. So let's bring those people together to tell us what we should be doing. Seems patently obvious to me, but there we are. So that's basically what we did. And then as Peter said, I wrote that up as a book, which in some ways I regret that name. The Flat Pack Democracy is a useful name because people remember it, but it's not really, it was never really meant to be exactly a DIY guide, which you could exactly follow. It was more a sort of set of, we did this, now see what you can do with it. And then I don't really believe in democracy. Well, I believe in the concept of democracy. I'd love to have it, but I've realized that it's never existed for us. And so anyway, that's an aside really. But anyway, I wrote that book, and then that led in part to a number of other places. Some of the people in this room come from those places who've taken on those ideas and developed them in different ways. And then now I'm part of running something called Flat Pack 2021, where we're trying to, well, we're not trying, we are supporting anyone who wants to stand in 2021 in local elections in this same kind of way, as a group of individuals bound together by a common ethos. And I'm going to have to leave this meeting at 6:50 because I'm dashing off to Cornwall, to the southwest, to meet sort of 50 people there they've got elections everywhere in Cornwall next year. Pam's coming with me. So we'll we'll leave before the drinks party that follows this meeting. Who are a bunch of people who, and what we're doing there is we're trying to fit together people with some experience with people who want to do things, and have a number of ongoing meetings or Zoom calls to really to network and encourage and support, because a lot of this turns out to be about getting people confidence. If people can see that it's possible to do stuff at this level, and more than possible, it's actually, in my view, crucial, then they can be supported into that position. Because we're still in a place where way more than half of towns and parishes don't have elections because there's not enough people to stand. And I would say that the vast majority of parish and town councils in Britain are they trundle along. They do often a very good job at trundling along, but they're nowhere near ambitious enough to face the sort of shitstorm of Brexit and recession and the end of Corona and climate change that faces us. So I think unless this level up the game enormously, we're going to be in deep trouble. So I mean, that's the background to I and this group of people wanting to support people, which we're doing because we think it should happen. And one of the questions that often comes up, so the plan is, sorry, as I started off a few minutes ago saying, or 10 minutes ago saying, that we'll now kind of open this up into a very open conversation, because I know quite a lot of, or a number of the people who are in this room who have different experiences, and Nick knows others. Some I don't know, but I've been tipped off, which is great. The people who've come, like Peter Wright, for instance, who's in an independent council that I haven't met and don't know, but I know a little bit about. So the plan is to sort of run this as a very open conversation. I'm more than happy for people to challenge what I said at the beginning in relation to whether this level of our governance and our is where the action needs to be. One of the things that people often say is, or ask me or ask us is, can you do this at higher levels? And my answer has always been no, that actually it doesn't really work. And one of the people who's with us is Caritas, who has forced me to eat my hat. I had a lot of hat eating to do in 2019, actually, because a number of people failed to take my advice, extraordinary, and did stand at high levels and got in, and now and now run things and do stuff. And Caritas, I know, has to go to a meeting at 6:30. So I wondered if he might like to to comment on that particularly, and then we'll lead into this with Nick as much as me picking people up. And by all means, raise a hand if you feel your experience is particularly pertinent at this point. And then, if not, or I and Nick should be able to bring people in, like Chris and Pam and others who we know who are doing this, and others who've been tipped off. So that's the plan. Caritas, do you want to just say something about your experience of that? And as I say, standing at these higher levels, coming as you did from that basic same approach initially.
So do you want me to just focus on the higher level, Peter? What that was like? Yeah, I'm happy to. We made the decision. We put up Portishead Independence. We put up a slate of people for 10 out of the 12 seats at a town council level, and we won all 10. When we were planning for that, we considered the idea of running for the Unitary Authority, North Somerset Council. And one of our objectives was that the councillors that were in charge in Portishead, a lot of them were twin hatters, something called twin hatters, people who were also town councillors, were also unitary council representatives. And we decided that actually we wanted to go for an annihilation tactic and to make sure that these people had no positions of power at all, because they were very destructive for our town and very counterproductive. And contrary to Peter's philosophy, we actually thought that it was only half the job by getting rid of people that were very destructive at a town level. And actually, if you just left them in a unitary authority level, they could wreak actually even more havoc. So we stood candidates for there, and we were successful. And actually, inadvertently, independents across North Somerset were successful, and we are now the largest group on North Somerset Council and lead a rainbow coalition of Liberal Democrats, Labour, Green and us. And I was appointed the cabinet member for culture, leisure, tourism and community engagement. I'm not anymore because I got the offer I couldn't refuse of a job with a much better salary. So 3 weeks ago I moved on. But one advice I would say is if you are to do it, and you are going to run people at a unitary authority level, don't twin hat. I twin hatted, huge mistake. Run different candidates at a unitary level and have different ones at the town level, because you will have conflicts of interest and it will be very hard. And also as well, one of the difficulties, Peter's right, one of the very big difficulties between the town level and a unitary level or a district level is that some of it's quite easy at a town level. The independent group I belong to runs everything. There are 2 Liberal Democrats and 10 of us. And the Liberal Democrats just toe the line pretty much on what the independent agenda is and how we operate. But at a unitary level, I am part of a coalition of people who are like me, who don't believe in party politics and believe in participative democracy. I have to work with people who don't, who believe in the system as it is and are very supportive of the system as it is, and look at me a little bit wide-eyed and a little bit baffled when I explain the platform on which I was elected. So I have to compromise. And for some of my town council colleagues, that doesn't go down very well, because they believe that it's an absolutist approach and you should have this way or no way. So if you do decide to go for it, I think you need in your planning to make it very clear that you can't, unless you decide to put up candidates across your unitary and win, and if you do, good luck, you can't run everything in a participative, deliberative way, because you will have people that oppose you. You will have other independents that will oppose you as well, because there will be independents elected that actually quite like government and governance the way it is and think it's a great thing and think that you're being quite rubbish for actually saying otherwise. So I would consider that approach, because it's caused us a lot of problems. But as for running at a higher level, yes, it is worth it. And in the just under 2 years that I've had in post as an executive member, I have managed to institute things that are on participative democracy. There are plans for things like citizens forums, citizens panels, devolving a lot of power down to town councils from the unitary. And that was down to the fact that we had a say, but we had to compromise and we had to work within the system. I think that's probably enough for me.
No, thanks. That's great. Thank you. So does anyone want to comment on that particularly, or shall I bring in somebody else I have in mind at this point? Okay, David Beeman, you and I have met on screens, but not in real life. And I'm thinking...
I do exist, yeah.
I'm not quite sure which level. I mean, I know that you stand for a residence. You come to this through a residents association.
No,
right, at Farnham. But are you in more than one level?
Well, we're in the old traditional sector of a 3-tier system.
Okay.
A county council, borough council, and town council. And in fact, one of our councils is triple-hatted. He's a county council, borough council, and town council, and he found that's quite a strain. I'm a town council first. I'm also a borough councillor. Town council at Farnham, which is 40,000 people, one of the largest town councils, It's like the experience of Portishead. We control that 14 heads of 18 councillors. And in fact, there's no, even the two Conservatives and 2 Liberal Democrats there sort of behave in a different way than normal. In fact, we've always had a conciliatory approach at town council level. At borough council level, where I'm a borough council level for the same ward, in fact, we have, we're in we don't call it a coalition, we're in an unwritten alliance with Labour, Greens, and the Liberal Democrats. We have 15 seats. The Liberal Democrats 14, Green 2, Liberal Democrats 2, Labour 2, and Independents 2, and Conservatives 23. And we're all trying, and it's quite true, you have to be a compromise at that level. We're just about, but a lot revolves around personal chemistry. Very much so, I think, at that level. It's personal chemistry that keeps us together. And it's like you were saying, really, but it is quite difficult at times, and you have to learn to compromise at that level, I'm afraid, sometimes.
Okay.
But I mean, we've got. I'd like to ask you a question, actually, Peter. Is Somerset going through with one of the 3 chosen for unitary authorities, isn't it? I think at the moment.
Excuse me. So yes, so Somerset is definitely going to, like Northamptonshire, is going to get rid of its district level and move to some form of unitary, which makes things interesting in all kinds of ways. Not least that there'll be a massive election. So in 2021. In Northamptonshire, there are elections everywhere. There's 3 new towns, there's all the parishes and the unitary authorities, which I'll be really interested to see how political parties find enough candidates. I mean, the only way they'll do that is to do what David just implied or said, which is to have people who are multiply hatted, I think. So you'll have an individual who's standing at all levels. And although Caritas, I agree with Caritas that you can get advantages of that because someone can take up, I mean, in theory at least, someone can bring things to a town council meeting that they've heard in the higher levels. My experience was that people never came to the lower levels, or if they did, they came to the town council, they kind of stayed for 10 minutes and told you all the wonderful things they were doing, and then they went off because they weren't actually that interested at the town level. They were, they didn't get paid, and they came with their ego from above and descended upon us, told us what they were doing, and then disappeared. But I'm getting old and cynical, really, and I know that it's possible to there are also people who do that job really well, I think. So David's not your work's not particularly participatory, is it, or it's not?
Well, we have done now at the borough council level. We've had for example, we've got a Surrey County Council, God bless its cotton socks, claims it's got it's got a green agenda and everything. Yet they're supporting a fracking. It's a fracking proposal in part of the county. So we've had an open session where we invited people, a listening forum and all that sort of thing. We've been devolving things to the town councils if they wish it. So, for example, we've been transferring land and assets like that to town council levels. And I suppose it's a bit more traditional in the way we've done it, I suppose, but unconventional because we have to work in partnership with traditional parties, I suppose. But I mean, we are trying our best to get as much devolved as possible. And that's in my book, town councils do nice things, don't they? Borough councils have to sort of thing, collect the refuse and then you get the county council. The difference in the scale is immense.
Of course.
But one thing I would like to ask you is if someone said we're a bit puzzled by what's called these community councils, which are not going to be partially elected, and is that an approach being adopted? Right? And if we're going to say set up as a unitary authority itself, which is one of the mega authorities, they're talking about these community councils which will not be directly elected. We think that's wrong. And in fact, if you're going to have community council, it should be like a super sort of town or parish council.
I don't know. I mean, community council is the equivalent of a parish level, isn't it? I mean, anything that increases the engagement at a local level properly, I think is really to be welcomed. And just before I realise I'm cutting you off slightly, Dave, but I've realised I just want to give a moment to Andrew Mycock, if I can, because I know you also have to go at 6:30. Because I mean, I don't know. I think we passed each other when I was talking to Kirklees, because you work for Kirklees Council. And my understanding, I just want to touch on this in terms of that participatory bit, because you want to just say something about what you've been doing and whether how much does buy-in interest me from the councillors? Where is the push for participation in Kirklees? Where's that come from? Would be really
I actually worked for Huddersfield University, and Kirklees Council approached me in 2017, just after the EU referendum vote, and there'd been some local issues around voter registration and electoral fraud, and so they asked me to chair, as an independent chair, the Democracy Commission there, which is an ongoing piece of work which, to their good credit, is continuing on. It was originally briefed to go from 2017 to 2020, but they've embedded it now in as an ongoing theme of the council's work. And in many ways, it was about reimagining the role of the councillor, but also reimagining the way in which local citizens could participate in local democracy out with the local council. You know, there was a recognition that the local council wasn't the only fulcrum of local democracy. It was largely driven by the council themselves and local councillors. Interestingly enough, the Council Democracy Commission was largely comprised of local councillors who crossed party lines and on most issues were open to criticism. There were some issues that were more fundamental. They did have issues with that idea of delegating power down to parish councils and town councils. And I think there was an issue with the fact that local councillors can tend to be rather protective about their own remit. And the more radical elements in terms of bringing in things like votes at 16, lowering the voting age to bring more young voters in. They didn't go down the route of thinking around a citizens' assembly or some form of an alternative body to provide a balance to the local council. And I think that might have, in hindsight, been something of a shortcoming. And the subsequent work that was taken on has been driven largely by council officers rather than by the councillors themselves. And I think that therein says that maybe the real intent about the reform of local democracy was driven by local council officers as much as it was by local councillors. Okay.
No, it's interesting where it's come from. So do you think, I mean, that's really interesting that they see themselves, or you see, well, if you're still part of it, and as being a place that's really reimagining the role of councillors, because that's very much behind what I kind of feel I suppose my main gripe in some ways is with representative democracy. I don't think it works. I mean, I think it's just impossible, and that we need to change the role of councillors to one where they're facilitating the community as opposed to representing it. But I mean, as I say, I know you've got to go, but is that, I mean, is that what's driving Kirklees? And also, do you think that because all this work's gone on into this in the last 3 or 4 years, whatever it is, do you think there's any chance of that being pushed out and replicated, and you know, it being a model that gets taken up?
It has been to a certain extent. Newham and other parts of the country have held their own democracy commissions. I think in some senses there was a sense there was a realism that drove councillors to recognise that the traditional role of the councillor was dead. The idea of the representative being the embodiment of local democracy, and that they needed to collaborate and work in partnership with other citizens and other citizen groups more. I think that was something which they fundamentally recognised and that they took on board. I think the problem there is that there is a sense in which there's one thing to recognise that the current system isn't working and in the way in which citizens want to engage with local democracies change, and to put it bluntly, getting turkeys to vote for Christmas. And therein is the challenge. And in some senses, I think that if there was a problem with it, there wasn't other stakeholders, if we call them in the modern parlance, there wasn't other groups that drove that sense in which change and had ownership over it. So if the lessons were to be learned there is that I think Kirklees did something which was remarkably brave. I think the councillors were very open to change, but the scale and the vision of change may have been constrained by their own institutional interests and their own institutional sort of behaviour. And I think looking back on it now, we would probably have done things slightly differently in that sense.
But that's really useful experience for other people doing it, other places. I mean, it's anyway. We won't perhaps stay with you too long, but it's kind of like I'm just really fascinated that bunch of councillors, as you say, were brave enough, because there is a degree of voting for Christmas in all this. It's like they have to lose power in this process. I mean, it won't work if they go out with all of that consultation, which I know took place, and people like me were involved, and so it's brilliant that they stepped up and did that.
I think so. I think fundamentally, but as an academic, that often sometimes you hold utopian visions about how local democracy can be reformed, and you often see it in rather sort of theoretical terms. I always thought that the council's preparedness not only to open themselves up to citizen scrutiny, but also that they invested local resources into actually holding that democracy commission was a remarkably brave step, and one which I think has rewarded them in the fact that they have started on a journey. I think that the lesson is that this kind of change takes time, and there was possibly an over expectation in the extent to which change could be enacted over a short period of time, and also there was probably a bit of a dissonance in terms of the idea about, well, what are we actually seeking to achieve? And there, I think that was the problem, that there wasn't enough citizen voice in there at the start of the journey. I think that they could have done much more engagement with citizens in determining the terms of what the Democracy Commission were going to achieve. And as they went along the journey, allowing citizens to sort of take control of that. But I think that, to conclude, I think in many senses, the thing that I find dealing with councils, not just in Kirklees, but across West Yorkshire and in Greater Manchester where I live, is there is a recognition that the current model isn't working particularly well. And that's replicated, it's evidenced by the fact that turnouts in local elections aren't really significantly changing. There isn't really a sense in which there's a greater sense of engagement, even after devolution. In Greater Manchester, we're not seeing any particular significant boost to local elections, even with a regional mayor. And in that sense, that the systemic challenges of rebooting local democracy, if you want to call it that, go beyond the council chamber. And I think that is something which is a journey which Kirklees is only partially on. And it requires groups like yourself to actually, in a positive, constructive way, engage with councillors and take them on that journey with them, help them on that journey. I think that the problems and the ills of local democracy will not be solved by local politicians or local councils or councils themselves. It requires that citizen participation and engagement. So, more power to your elbow. I think that this is an excellent initiative, and I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how it develops over time.
Cool. Thank you, Caritas.
Hello, I've got to go in a minute, but I just thought I'd kind of give an example of the kind of battle at a higher level you have to take. One of the first things I did joining the Unitary North Somerset as a councillor was I was quite shocked that at the start of each meeting, the entire council stood up and was led in a Christian prayer. And I objected to that because I believe that I represent people of all faiths and none. And I felt that was very counterproductive. So in the subsequent meeting, I proposed the abolition of prayers in council meetings. And this is how backward I think local government is. That got covered by the Times, not the North Somerset Times, the Times. And, it was, I had people, other independents, who wouldn't talk to me for weeks because they thought, oh, it's tradition, it's the way it's done. And, we won it in the end. And, that is one of the kind of things, but there was severe opposition to that. And one more example, we're currently working on our local strategic development plan. And one of the roles I had was working on how you engage the wider public in actually having a say in the development of housing and infrastructure in North Somerset, and trying to demystify the process because it's very jargonistic. I was on that committee with a senior Liberal Democrat councillor who said this, and I tell you no lie, oh, why do we have to bother with this? The public are too thick to understand these wider concepts anyway. This is just a box ticking exercise. Why do we have to engage with people who don't have the intelligence to actually take part in the argument? And that's a Lib Dem. So, I'm really sorry I couldn't stay for longer, and I wish you all good luck. But yeah, I'm right behind you, and I've got email details. I'm sure Peter could pass them on, and if you want any questions, feel free to email me. Thanks, guys, and good luck.
Thank you.
So in the chat, Ruth has kindly reminded us that everyone who's talked so far has been male. Absolutely spot on. I chaired, or I sat in a meeting with George Monbiot a while ago, and he said to me at the beginning, I want the first 3 questions to come from women, and I'd completely forgotten that. And thank you for reminding me. I mean, and I asked him, you know, in doing that, I said, why is that? And he said, there's loads of research about this. You know, get in there early. Anyway, I apologise for that. I had in mind, you won't believe this, but anyway, I wanted to turn to a particular aspect of this. Pam has two has many hats on, but Pam Barrett of Buckfastleigh has 2 aspects to this that I want to kind of move to. One is perhaps slightly sticking with these multi-level things, because I think she and I very much agree where we come from with on this. And then also I want to go from Pam to Chris Hood, because there's something I was talking to Pam about earlier on, or she was talking to me about a couple of days ago, in relation to rural areas. I'll show you where my theme goes like this, or where my brain goes. If I'm kind of half running this, you've just got to put up with me, I'm sorry. There's one of the sort of criticism, one of the sort of things that people bring up around this whole idea is that many people, particularly in metropolitan areas, don't have parish and town councils. There's a point I want to come to around the needs and the poverty and the deprivation that exist in Britain. And then I want to move through to Susanna, who has perhaps part of the answer by being a community council in London. So the route I want to go is Pam, Chris, Susanna. Sorry about Chris being in there as a male still. Pam.
I'm going to be brief, and I'm going to be a bit heretical now, because I feel the same about councillors as I do about MPs. They have fuck all relevance to me and my community. Where I am at the moment in Buckfastleigh, we have no public sector. District, county, national MPs, there is nothing happening here that is helping my community. And whether you have a council or whether you don't, in places like this and in most places, people do not have a voice. So I'm hearing that from Manchester, where you're looking at the unitary authorities in Manchester, the city region, you know, the people's powerhouse. There are not voices there from people who are being affected by the decisions that are being made. So whatever level you're in, whether it's towns or parish or parliament, is if your job isn't to find out what your community needs and then find a way to make it happen, what the hell are you there for? And I feel really strongly that actually there is a completely broken line between the communities. I've been sitting with young mums today in tears of gratitude as I pass out to them chilled ready meals, because it's that desperate in our community, and there is nobody stepping up to do this. So I don't really care what districts and county councillors are compromising on. I want to see a radical shake-up where the people on the ground are having a say in the decisions that affect their lives. And I'm a bit cross, so forgive me.
Thank you. Your crossness is welcome. Chris, you're a man from a rural place, you know, who did very much the kind of thing I've been advocating for, in as I understand it. You know, you weren't thinking of becoming a councillor or taking anything over, but as you know, and then have done a whole raft of stuff. Do you want to sort of pick that up in terms of rural poverty and rural need? And because I think I've only just, it's definitely true in Frome, which is rural kind of rural Somerset, and I've only realised the extent to which we're missing out. You know, and so that whole thing about not having councils in the metropolis is a bit of a, well, anyway, it's another issue. Chris.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, to give a very sort of brief outline of the lay of the land here in County Durham, I, in the very late months of 2016, seen that there was a vacancy just on our parish council, and I was involved with a lot of community groups, with local charities and such like, and felt as if I could have a part in helping shape the area in which I live. Haswell, as he says, is nigh on the Durham County coast. Durham County Council is the largest unitary authority in the country, a huge area that was made up of previously 7 district councils, and Haswell sat within the district of Easington, where Billy Elliot was shot, where infamously the miners' strikes and the celebrations that took place at Margaret Thatcher's death, they were rife across the county, because the effects of not only Conservative but Labour unitary authorities, district authorities, governments had a real effect on the place where we live, and so probably from the 1960s there was a drive from those in power back in the 1960s to create categoried villages and towns, and Haswell was shifted into what was then called a Category D village. It was one sheet of paper, and that paper basically said was to slowly drive out any infrastructure, any resources, any support, so that the people of the villages around the larger sort of concubinations such as Seaham and Peterlee, which are bigger towns, they would be driven out to those areas. So simple things like, there isn't a school here, there's a bus that runs once an hour, no things like mobile libraries. We have a corner shop, which is also a post office. We have one pub. Like I say, no school, no real infrastructure, nothing to support. And Haswell turned into a commuter village, a lot like a lot of the many other ex-mining towns and colliery sort of villages and towns that are across the Durham coalfields. And I said, maybe I can help, maybe I could do something. Tried put in the application because it was within 6 months, so I could be co-opted on before the elections in May 2016. May 2017, and was ignored. So put another email in, and cut a long story short, was ignored 7 times, and said, right, let's do something about it, and spoke to people who sounded very much like Pam and her passion, and discussed it the way things were going on and around their village. And we had, at the time, 6 women, 3 men, including myself, made up of ex-prison officers, a dinner lady, a social worker, a real plethora of people who made up the fabric of our community, and formed the Haswell's Community Party in 1st of February 2017. We were constituted and accepted by the Electoral Commission by March the 1st, 2017, and then took all 9 seats. And it was very, very grassroots, driven by our little yellow Bible, written by Peter and his colleagues, and brought back, and using a word from Civic Revival, brought back genius loci, brought back spirit of place, and listened to what people wanted, what their concerns were, realised everybody's voice had a part of the story to tell and the drive to make changes. And we've been, like I say, it took all 9 seats, and we've been the council ever since. However, our role has shifted from what we feel the parish council was and should be in a lot of places, to actually providing what our unitary authority and even our national government should be doing. It's now 2020, and in our village, 1 in 3 children live in poverty. There is huge deprivation, socioeconomic, educational, and employment. And we find ourselves driven to really almost become like a charity. I don't know if anybody is a fan of the comic Henning Weng, but it's his line of, in Germany, there's no such thing as charity because the government does as it's supposed to do. That's what we find ourselves doing the work of what we feel our unitary authority should be doing, and that is now our drive to continue to make change, to listen to the people who live within our parish. We're made up of 2 villages, Haswell and Haswell Plough, but is to try and shake off those the shackles of what was a Category D village, which is still prevalent right throughout our community, throughout the county, People see County Durham as quite an affluent place because of Durham City and the university and place around it. Well, it's two very different places. It's tough, but it's our drive, and it's something that we will continue to work at and look forward to for many years to come.
Thanks, Chris. So what I was trying to picture for you in a sense earlier is that there are 10,000 parish and local councils, you know, and all of them could be operating in the same way that Chris has just described. And as I see it, you know, kind of as he's just said, has to. 1 in 3 children living in poverty. You know, it's kind of like, and it's patently obvious that help is not help. You know, it's not. The policies aren't coming riding over the hills to do anything about that. So it seems absolutely crucial. Now, the bit I want to come to before going to Ruth Hubbard is, well, both Susanna and Ruth are in cities. Susanna in London, and I want to just touch on this business of, or this issue that, of course, there isn't a parish and town. There isn't a parish or level of council, a community level council in the vast majority of metropolitan councils, but there was an opportunity to create them that was introduced in the Localism Act, the one which I was slagging off earlier as having done nothing for anyone. And Susanna's work in Queen's Park and her colleagues is a sort of shows that there is a little glimmer of hope in that area, which I think is really interesting. And it'd be really nice to just hear her touch on that. And then if Ruth does what I think she does, and we haven't spoken, but I've spoken to other colleagues who are working in Sheffield. As I understand it, there's Sheffield's got a very partisan, very political council that a bit like Froomes, but on a much, much bigger and more important level, in a sense, spent its life fighting each other at a political level. But there are moves to try and do something really radical about that and to reclaim politics at a grassroots level. So that's my long introduction to Susanna, and then Ruth, and then I'm going to hand over at some point in this process. I'm going to hand over to Nick, or hand back to Nick. Nick can disappear and head off to Cornwall. So Susanna.
Hello. Really interesting so far. Sorry I was late.
Sorry, Susanna, you're slightly quiet.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
Sorry, I'll just speak up. Should have put a microphone on, but I hope that's okay. Sorry to be late. That was really interesting what I've heard so far. So yes, in Queen's Park, which is in the city of Westminster, although you wouldn't think so, we're sort of quite a few miles out really from what anyone thinks Westminster is. We set up London's first and still only parish council, although we called it community council, in a campaign that started in 2010, and we had our first elections in 2014. So we're currently just over halfway through our sort of second 4-year cycle. And we're still a very new institution, is one of my sort of reflections hearing on what's been said so far. In terms of what the sort of culture is, the sort of democratic culture, you know, representative versus participatory, and so on. I just feel we're still sort of figuring out who and what we are really, and I don't know how long that's going to take. The prehistory of our council, so we're a neighbourhood that has quite a sort of distinctive sort of built environment. It's an estate of Victorian cottages, and then also a red brick estate, so a sort of Victorian estate, sort of 1870s cottages, and then the Mozart estate, which is a red brick sort of 80s housing estate, and then several rows of sort of Edwardian houses that are mostly divided into flats. And it's a poor area. Only about 20% of residents are owner-occupiers. Obviously, Westminster's you know, flagship Conservative borough, but the north bit of the borough where we are is a Labour area with a Labour MP. So it's not what you necessarily think of as Westminster, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And our prehistory was that there was a charity involved in our area, dating back sort of 10 years before us, that had a very clear sense of democratic and civic engagement as one of its goals. So along with sort of economic and social regeneration, they always had a sort of vision of regeneration that involved making up a sort of democratic deficit as well as a sort of economic and employment one. So that's our sort of where we came from. I mean, I suppose what frustrates me is that I feel if local government could be more identified with itself as local government versus national government, sort of more sort of pro-democracy rather than a sort of left-right axis, which our politics, you know, obviously is the kind of dominant axis in our politics. If local government could sort of be a bit more sort of united and see itself as having a set of interests that are distinct from sort of centralisation. I mean, if devolution as a kind of broad principle, obviously there's different ways of doing that and all the different levels of local government can get into fights with each other. But if there was a sort of broad principle which was basically towards pushing power down, you know, then I sort of feel local government would get a bit further. But it just doesn't ever feel possible. You know, even the big local government, you know, even when the big conservative counties get into fights with central government, when it comes to the crunch, they always, you know, then always in the end, it feels like they always toe the party line. So as much as, you know, conservative counties do get fed up with central government, and, you know, it just feels like when it comes to the crunch, local government is never really prepared to kind of, you know, all come together and sort of fight the centre. And as long as that goes on, I just find it very difficult to see where what I would regard as progress, which would be very much, you know, towards more democracy, as I say, power down. Again, with us, I'm not quite clear really whether we're trying to be a sort of new tier of ultra-local representative democracy, or be more participatory. I mean, I think probably a bit of each, or we haven't quite worked it out. And the only, you know, the other thing I would say about participatory democracy is that, you know, I think it takes a lot of evenings. You know, it doesn't, it's sort of all well. The thing about socialism, it doesn't have to be socialism. It's just democracy that takes lots of evenings. You know, it can be, and community takes a lot of evenings, you know, running fates and, all, you know, all the kind of voluntaristic things that go on in conservative areas and that aren't socialist at all also take a lot of evenings. So I guess I do have some, I mean, I suppose one of my main sort of reflections really on the sort of, you know, 10 years that I've been involved in this stuff, which I do find really rewarding, and I'm so glad I've done it, and I hope obviously others in London will eventually follow, is just that I just feel, you know, and it comes out of the, you know, some of the COVID mutual aid stuff, that when there's this big surge of kind of enthusiasm in kind of community stuff, you know, people sort of think, oh yeah, this is great, we want more of this, you know, it's really nice, you know, community spirit's great. But it's the sort of, you know, whether there's really, it's, you know, it just takes such a lot of work to sustain it. And, you know, people and relationships are really complicated. And whether that's really where lots of people want to put their energies and the efforts is just remains a question for me. I mean, you know, so far, you know, we've got a kind of hardcore of residents who do stuff as well as the councillors, you know, got our 12 councillors, we've got, but it doesn't feel like, you know, it's interesting to hear about the point about Manchester and the turnout not going up. Our turnout has actually gone up a bit since we've had the community council, but I just think one does have to be careful of kind of promising the world, or this kind of utopian, you know, world of, you know, everybody sort of baking cakes for everybody. Is that useful? I don't know if there's anything else you want me to, don't want to talk too long.
I think that's great. I mean, there'll be more, if you're able to stay, there'll be more opportunity. Ruth's going to say a little bit about her work in Sheffield, and then Nick will take over, and there'll be more opportunity for people to ask and chat, you know, after 7. But no, that's great, Susanna. Thanks for that.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's great to be amongst a group of people, many of whom have actually gone ahead and taken over their councils. I'm from It's Our City, a community network in Sheffield, and we are going to change the way our council works. I mean, you'll know Sheffield is a big post-industrial, 500,000 plus people, a large amount of poverty, many inequalities, and our city is saturated with party politics. In fact, it's got a really interesting political history, often about factions on the left of politics, the rise and fall of the Communist Party, and we have a council who, well, I'll tell you about the council. There's another history in Sheffield, and it is the history of protest. of community, of organised labour, from whether it's the Kinder Trespass, the Battle of Orgreave, which is still very real to many, whether it's early feminist action, whether it's diversity politics, and so on and so forth. We have 28 wards in Sheffield and 84 councillors. And as I say, our party is saturated in party politics. The last independent councillor was, it may have been 1992, but I actually think it was 1982. And there is no tradition in big northern cities of independence. That's slightly coming up now. We are a community network, and we came together in a tradition of community to ask each other, what do we do about this? And the main trigger was the Street Tree campaign. And we had a council imprisoning citizens for peaceful protest, a council seeking to criminalise parts of the population, using trade union legislation to do so. And we had no idea how decisions were being made. We couldn't work out who was responsible for what was going on. Our councillors could not find information out, and so on and so on and so on. And we had a council that did not listen to its communities. We have no community forums with any devolved power. And yet we're Sheffield. We are a community city. And we asked, what can we do? And we turned to each other and we said, we're going to turn to each other. And politics is, of course, far, far bigger than any political parties. And that is the basis on which we are working. We are exercising our rights under the Localism Act. And Peter, I know, has said the Localism Act is hopeless. It gives community, in very thin areas, it gives our communities certain rights. And one of those rights is to change the way your council works. We have strong leader governance at the heart of Sheffield City Council. And the question is, how do you, and a strong leader who holds on to nearly all the decision making. There is a 9.7% electoral mandate from the people of Sheffield, and yet the ruling group holds almost all the power to make almost all the decisions, and they are hermetically sealed. And if you're not with them, you are against them. So what do? We have community rights under the Localism Act, and what we did is we collected the largest ever statutorily binding petition for a change of governance. And councils, as many of you will know, I'm not going to get into the mayoral debates, but largely have a choice between strong leader governance, which vests power in the executive. That is the intention of the strong leader model, that it is the executive who can take, as Sheffield Council does, all the power to make all the decisions despite no mandate. Or you can have a committee system. This is not about going back to the old committee system. These are modern committee systems. And every council who has changed to a modern committee system has done so in the name of making their council more democratic, where power is vested in the council as a whole. We have a situation in Sheffield where 10 councillors out of 84, the cabinet, and mostly the leader, makes almost all the decisions and clings on to that power ruthlessly. And that means that more than 90% of people in Sheffield are simply unrepresented. Our councillors cannot get information. They do not participate in all the decision making. And we are effectively disenfranchised. We collected 26,500 signatures, which was more than 5% of the electorate of Sheffield. We were opposed at every turn. We attempted endlessly to engage the council in making some change. And as a result of that petition, we have removed the power from our council to decide the way they work. And there was due to be a citywide referendum as a result of our petition last May, and of course 7 weeks before COVID. That referendum will take place on the 6th of May 2021, and we think it's going to be won. Very importantly, our campaign over a year of collecting signatures, we had 20,000 conversations with citizens. Their views, insights, ideas, experiences, analyses, reflections, values and beliefs about how they wanted and how we want our city to work. And we found we have a common agenda, and working across all our differences, and there are many, we are working to this common agenda. And because of that, we have a unique set of data, if you like, from 20,000 citizen conversations. And I think this is it's never been done before. And our council leader would say people are not interested. They're not interested in politics. 70% don't vote. We know best. They are interested. They are absolutely interested. And those citizen conversations are the best part of our campaign. And as a result of those conversations and the data we have and the material we have, we're going to be doing some very exciting things with that, because we know that changing a model from a strong leader model to a modern committee system will not solve all the problems. Local governance is an ecosystem, if you like, of structures, cultures, systems and processes. And we intend to make a really big contribution to changing that ecosystem beyond the change of model. It is a necessary change, but it is not a sufficient change. And because of all the bottom-up work we've done, we're going to be kind of doing quite a lot about democratic local governance, which absolutely is the aspiration of Sheffield communities. And 90%, more than 90% of people who we spoke to in parks, on the streets, in shops, at events, all year, wanted to sign the petition and wanted to know what it was about. Because who knows that at the heart of our councils are constitutions. And constitutions can be enlivened, they can be dynamic, they can be living documents, and they need to reflect the way that communities want to live together, work together, and care for each other. And they can. Thank you. Does that make sense?
Ruth, that was fantastically inspiring. Thank you very much. I'd just like to bring in Peter Wright, if he's able to talk about Horwich and Blackpool, and then Peter Tyzak from Pilning and Severn Beach. And after that, I'd like to open it up for people to respond to what they've heard so far. And perhaps if you'd like to speak, perhaps you could send me a message on the message board. So, Peter Wright.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm just an average Joe Blogs. I'm very much low intelligence compared to everybody I've heard here. I was a gardener who decided to go into politics. I'm from Bolton, and Bolton Council has been run for the last 39 years by one party, the Labour Party. It's not getting into politics, it could be any party, but over this time, they've got complacent, and they've just not been listening to the public. And where they have committees, they've appointed themselves committee leaders. The people have well, just all the heads of the committees and deputy leaders all this one party, they've taken over everything. And we've had instances where there's been suspected corruption in Bolton, where the party leader has been making decisions for himself and using emergency measures to make decisions in Bolton. So I'm from a local party in Horwich, which is on the border of Bolton. Bolton's made up of all different little parishes, and it's from Horwich and Blackrod, not Blackpool, Horwich and Blackrod. And I just one day decided to go into politics, go into local council, because I used to involved with a lot of community groups, and I run food banks and community groups for the elderly. And I went into politics on parish council. I was part of a large party, the Labour Party, and I was, up to a few years ago, I was the mayor of Horwich as well. So I got to wear the gold chain. And there was a small party called Horwich First, which started. And they're just a community-based group. And they wanted to do more on the local level. And I decided to leave a mainstream party and join this local community group. And there was another community group in Blackrod called Blackrod First, and we joined forces and eventually formed our own party, which 6 months before the election, we came up with our name, Horwich and Blackrod First Independence, and we ran for the seats in the parish council. There's 14 seats on parish council. We didn't have enough candidates, we only had 11. So we put our 11 up and we won every single seat, which is and 4 years later, we decided to go to stand for the borough council as well, the Bolton Borough. And myself and the leader of our party, Mary Brady, we stood for Bolton Council against all the big parties, and we were laughed at. And we won, yeah, overwhelming majority again. So we've this is where we are at the moment, and hopefully we're trying to bring democracy down to local level. And there's in Bolton there is a lot of wards which can have parishes, but they're not advertised, and people don't know what power they can have, to change the local community. And it is difficult to change things in a borough council because it's all party politics led. But we are making a difference. Saying it, the Labour Party in Bolton didn't manage the 40 years. We put a stop to that, and we did a 25-point plan with the Conservative Party and lots of smaller parties, Lib Dems and the rest of it. And we formed a new council, and we're slowly making changes. But I would like to get the smaller wards, start the parishes up again, and bring it back to local people. Pretty much that's it. Right, thank you.
Peter, thank you very much. Very good. Can we now go to South Gloucestershire?
Okay, that's me,
Peter
Tyzack. I'm the chairman of the Pilning and Seven Beach Parish Council. I've only been as chairman less than a year, in fact, but I've been a councillor on the district council, or the unitary authority of South Gloss, for 18 years prior to that. I'm a strong believer in never allowing twin hatting, or let alone triple hatting, as somebody referred to, because I believe that you get a better type of democracy, if you can call it democracy, by having more people involved. And if you allow any one person to commandeer several roles, even if it's chairman of the village hall, it should be a separate person, a different person involved in each of these things. You shouldn't be going around collecting things like medals, because you have less and less time to do the things. My whole experience of being on the district council, and by the way, I did stand for parliament a couple of times. My whole experience has been that the two old parties, as I call them, by and large, only seek election for pursuit of power, and power corrupts, as we all know. And the Labour and Conservatives in particular believe in centralising that power. And whilst both of them have talked about localism, even brought in an act, which, as Ruth says, is quite helpful, they really don't believe in it, because even now at South Gloucestershire level, they still have to bid to Whitehall for money to repair the roads. So they really don't have a lot of autonomy at even a unitary authority level. But the parish council, which is more of interest, as I was district councillor, I was aware that the parish council were just jogging along, doing not a lot, where there was a lot of opportunity, a lot of demand for things. And in order to get something done within the parish, responding to the residents' interests, I found one way of doing it was to set up a village regeneration group, which was not a separate independent group that didn't involve the parish council. They would push forward and get things done in spite of the parish council. As time went on, some of the old guard moved on one way or another, and so I took it upon myself at each parish election, although I wasn't actually a parish council, I would attend every parish meeting, and I would go down the list of people who'd contacted me in the parish about various things and say, why don't you stand for the parish? And quite often they'd say, well, I don't want to get involved in politics, because they've got the jaundiced view of what politics was about from the media, being dominated by the two old parties and the celebritizing of party leaders, where people go and vote and say, oh, I voted for Tony Blair. Well, of course they didn't, because they didn't live in his constituency. But they talk in those terms. And so I lost my seat because people who were supporting me as a Lib Dem, who had previously voted Labour, when we got involved, when the party, should I say, got involved with the coalition, those Labour people didn't like it and stopped voting Lib Dem, and so they then voted Labour, and of course a Conservative got in. So the reason I'm making that point is that our voting system is part of our problem, and so I would take issue slightly with something that Andrew Mycott was saying, I think it was, that the starting point from the top end working down is that we need a voting system that reflects the people and would enable people who wish to be independent of the party structure, would it enable them to more easily stand as an independent, because at the moment, if you stand as an independent at a district or county level, you are fighting the party machine, which is a massive task. And so it's brilliant that North Somerset have succeeded it through Portishead, an area I know well because my daughter lives there. And so it's all about power to the big parties. And I do remember Peter Lilly. He said, who cares about principle if it doesn't get you elected? Because only by getting elected do you get power. So his interest was not principle, it was power. And I also remember listening to Paddy Ashdown when he said, I want for my party that we take power in order to give it away. We don't want to control everything. We want the power to be handed back to the people. And that's the principle behind localism. As a parish council, we called a meeting with the chief exec before the lockdown, this was, and asked for better rapport with the district council, because at the moment it's at a very poor low ebb. The district council is, the unitary authority it is, at South Gloss is run by the Conservative Party on a cabinet system. And we also feel that many of the officers are run by the party and told what to do. So we called the chief exec down to meet with us about the issues where we had been trying to get some action, but getting nowhere. And he blithely said, local councils are the building blocks of democracy, which obviously I would guess everybody here would agree with. we have, in conjunction with other parish councils, we have something called a parish council forum, and the forum worked with the office at the South Gloss and drew up a charter, an agreement between the parishes and the district. And they say in that charter it says we are working in partnership. But you could fool me, because quite often we're demanding action on something and they say, oh, well, we can't do anything about that, or we don't want to, or we want to put, the latest thing is they want to put speed bumps through all our villages. We say, well, hang on, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Oh, well, we've got the power because we're the Highways Authority and we think it's the solution. But we tend to think that it's been dictated to them by the political party in charge. I could rabbit on like this for a while, but I think I ought to give it a rest and let somebody else have a go.
Yeah, that was very, very, very useful. Thank you. So I think
I see Anne Hitchcock responding to me. I wonder if she'd like to speak.
Okay, Anne.
Well, thank you, Peter. I found, well, as you could tell from my nodding, I did find a lot of your comments certainly interesting and could understand what you were saying. I have been fascinated by all of this discussion. I should say from the start that I have never been actively involved in any local government of any sort. I've always sat on the edges looking in. So I'm not sure that I can comment to the level that everybody else has been doing here. I am, however, very active in my local community and have never really understood why the my town council and now my unitary authority works in quite the way that it does. I should say that I live in Dorset. I live in North Dorset, which about, well, 2 years ago now, moved from having district councils to a unitary authority. I've been fascinated by all the talk of councillors wearing two hats, and we have an awful lot of that in Dorset. And I'm also, I've never understood why town councillors, and I live in a town of some 13,000 residents, why the town councillors all have to belong to a major political party. I don't actually understand the relevance of that, and certainly some of the discussion here has helped me maybe understand that a little bit more. One of the things that I am missing in the conversation that you've all been having is people have been talking a lot about we and never really define who they mean by we. Who is this mythical we that you talk about? I know it's something we all do, but when you're listening to a conversation like this or trying to take part, it can get a little bit confusing. So I think I would ask that you clarify that maybe. As I say, I sit on the fringes of all of this. I happen to own, co-own a large building in the center of the town in which I live. And that building has, whether I like it or not, given me quite a prominent role within my local community. And in the last year, I have been working hard with the ground floor of the building and opening it up in different ways. And on the 1st of August, opened a cafe and coffee bar. Slightly strange thing to do during lockdown, which leads me on to say something else about the conversation this evening. I wonder generally how much effect the current coronavirus situation is having on a lot of the things that you've all been talking about, and in particular local democracy. Having a coffee bar in the centre of town has been quite an eye-opener. I've found people coming in, all sorts of people come in, and they want to talk, and they want to talk about all sorts of different things, from local issues through to much wider issues. It's been fascinating to me the way that people talk and the way they are desperate to talk, and to talk at length and to talk about serious things, and feel that they don't have places in which they can do that. So I am extremely concerned about this latest lockdown, which I feel strongly has stopped us talking to each other. It's almost been designed to keep us apart. I think the conversation we're having this evening is very important, but we are just such a small number of people talking for such a fraction of time.
Picking up on that, Anne, I think that's a very good thought. Does anybody have any thoughts on how the 2 screens that we've had this evening could be expanded to 50 screens? I mean, it seems to me that the conversation we're having needs to be had by a lot more people, and particularly people involved in third sector organisations. But just be interested to hear if anybody's got any thoughts on that. If anybody'd like to speak, please just raise a hand. Yes, sorry. Chris Hyde.
Yeah, no, the point that Anne was just making there, I can relate to that in the sense that these strange 6 months or more, feels like years, that we've been suffering from the pandemic. I mean, it has, I think, led people to generate self-help groups, in part of necessity, but there's kind of been this growth really in community-based help, you know, where people are looking to each other. I suppose in part, there's a practical point here. I suppose in part that people haven't been spending so much time commuting into work, so they've been a kind of around, but it's happened. But also there's been a recognition that people need people and they need to talk to each other. So I do recognize that. And I wonder also whether the spin-off from that is actually the potential for greater participatory democracy and a greater interest in the community. And certainly where we are trying to set in motion community-based participatory democracy initiatives, one of which is we've been running community assemblies to talk about a number of local issues. And the other thing is that we're setting up a local kind of a very much kind of climate emergency based what we call a hub, which is basically built around a cafe, but it's basically a space, a community space that people can use to talk when obviously the lockdown is lifted. And we're getting a lot of interest in that. People are kind of just cropping up through the community and expressing a lot of interest in this non-profit making space that people can use, backed up with a facility where people can actually talk away from local councils using, you know, the community assembly model in which they can discuss. So, you know, I very much relate to what Anne was just saying there in terms of COVID generating this, but also it kind of plugs into a different way of linking with the community and representing interests. So I think some very important points there.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. Right, I've got a hand up. Susanna. And then if after Susanna, I'd quite like to ask Richard if you would just say a few concluding words.
Well, I'd like to come back on what Chris was saying, if I may, but in a moment.
Okay.
I just wanted to say something about education. And it's been our experience, you know, doing something new in London. I mean, obviously for very good reason, people in London aren't familiar with parish councils and parish governance because it's never been here before. And we've got lots of migrants, and it's quite a rapid turnover in where we live. Very, very diverse community. Arabic's the second most popular language. but the sort of, I mean, the whole sort of citizenship in schools sort of agenda under New Labour, which did make some progress, was originally led by lawyers who I think thought people didn't understand the legal system. But I still think that the sort of level of just basic understanding of how sort of democracy works and what the different bits of levels of government are responsible for, you know, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, the civil service, is so weak. And I know it's a real problem that people are always saying, oh, this should be in the curriculum, that should be in the curriculum. You know, every enthusiasm from cooking to, you know, sport, you know, it's easy to say we should do more of this. But I do feel like it's a real obstacle if people don't understand, you know, and also not just how it works from outside, but also just the culture of elections. One of the things we were struck by is that, you know, getting people to stand, you know, can be really difficult, and it can be more difficult when you're trying to run as an independent thing because it feels very personal. But the advantage of parties, which we don't have, but obviously is that being rejected is not so personal. At least it feels it's more linked to your ideas. Whereas if you're just standing as an individual and you don't get chosen by your neighbours, you know, we've had people who've stood and then really retreated from any kind of involvement, which I can completely understand. And I just think that most people have not ever stood in an election. We don't tend to run mock elections in schools. I mean, school governors is one of the only, you know, or trade unions. But apart from that, no one ever stands for election for anything. So I suppose I sort of think that we need to get democracy outside local government as well, and just sort of somehow foster a more democratic culture where, yeah. And then the other thing I just want to say really briefly is that I feel in London, you know, trying to get these things off the ground, one of the problems is I feel there are objections from right and left. So from the right, obviously, it's sort of anti-state, you know, more tax, you know, whatever, Turkey's voted that they would just be against that ideologically. But from the left, you know, I feel like the kind of localism thing, you know, it's one thing like Queen's Park or maybe, you know, a village in Bolton saying Queen's Park first. That, you know, that isn't a slogan that we use, but I don't think anybody would have been offended by it. As I said, we're a sort of, you know, deprived neighbourhood, and why shouldn't we put ourselves in our local youth centre and our local kids who can't afford to eat first? But obviously in London, you know, Labour wouldn't like that, because what if it's Mayfair first or Belgravia first? You know, it just, there is a kind of awkwardness about, and I think that's one of the reasons why it hasn't gone anywhere with London, because neither of the big parties really want it, and they, you know, it's not like Sheffield. It's not just one party, but each borough is a bit like a one. You know, there's hardly any boroughs that ever change hands. They're either sort of Labour one-party state or Tory one-party states in Westminster or Kensington, and unless I just don't think the parties see what's in it for them. So yeah. I wish I felt more like there was a bit more support from above. You know, they all talk about localism, as someone else said, but it all feels a bit paper thin.
Can I come back now?
Very good point. Certainly, Peter.
I could make a pretty good stab of explaining to anybody how our political system is supposed to work, but what we're about tonight is why it isn't working. And a couple of people have said that representative democracy doesn't work. I think it doesn't work because it's been usurped, particularly by the two old parties, in that they want to centralise the power. I think Ruth was talking about Sheffield, where the leader has the power over the cabinet and nobody else gets a look in. Well, I wonder if that in that sort of situation, and I believe certainly in our council's position, that the party probably regionally or nationally is telling him what to do. There isn't any driver or motivation from the point of view of what the local community want. It's what the party is saying and what Boris is saying, or what whoever up there is saying. And I obviously alluded to Liberal Democrats because that's who I was a member of, but I am no longer, because they seem to be wanting to go in the same sort of direction as Labour and Conservative now, rather than relating to the local people. And so representative democracy is the right model if it's allowed or made to work by representatives, as Ruth was saying, of the community. Whereas I well remember introducing one of our parish councillors to our Member of Parliament, and his immediate question to her was, "Which party do you represent?" She turned on him and tore a strip off him and said, "I don't represent any party, I represent the community." And he went away shamefaced about that, and rightly
Really?
so. But that is where the major political party people come from. They represent the party, not the people. And our current councillor, even on something as local as a planning application, we asked him to bring it into committee. He said, "Oh, I better check with the leader first." I said to him, "No, you don't have to. You are an individual councillor. You may be a member of a party, but you as an individual have got the power to call that in. You don't need to ask anybody permission to do your job." End of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think it was Chris and then Peter Wright. Chris, did you want to come back in? No, Peter Wright then.
That's it. Just getting to go with technology. Yeah, I apologise for rambling a little earlier on, but we've had a similar situation in Bolton that is party-led, and it seems like the officers, the cabinet, is the one that dictates what's happening, and it also seems like you have instructions from the leader to the officers, which tells the councillors what we can and can't do, which it should be the other way around. But when I first joined, obviously I left it a bit late. It's one of those things I would have liked to get into politics at a younger age. But when I got involved with local politics with the Labour group, it's when I first joined, I was asked, "Do you have any opinions about things?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I have some opinions. I like to change things." But one of the conditions was that you don't like to rock the boat, and they weren't happy. And obviously, I played along for a short while, and obviously it was just all party politics. The parish council had no say in the matter of anything, because the people who were on the borough council also sat on the parish council. For the leading party, they just wanted, their views put across, and obviously the parish council has no say at all. So it's not what I was disillusioned when I first joined the parish council, and I wanted to change things to get involved with the local community. And I think there's always been a lot of people that want to be involved with volunteering, local community work. But until now, until COVID, they've not really come out and had a chance to, to take part in things. So it's a very difficult thing to stop these big parties from, from just running the way they want. Just really just for the sake of the party than what the people want. So it can be done, but I'm surprised that what I've heard here, all the stuff that can be done by local politics. I'm going to take this back to the group, to the HBFI group, and start being a nuisance, causing a lot of change now. In our region.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ruth just wants to come in, and then I'm going to ask Richard Walker just to say a few sort of concluding words, but he stresses that people are very welcome to leave if they want. So Ruth.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can precisely remember what I was going to say, but one of the things I think I wanted to mention was that when you have a situation with a saturation of party politics, I mean, our situation is that, if any councillor so much as abstains, they are immediately suspended from the party. This completely driven focus on party interests rather than community interests. And I go back to this is why governance is important for me, because you can get a benign leader in place, perhaps. who does things well, who does things in a participatory way, or you can get independence in place. But what happens when those people leave? There's something about creating the conditions which are more sustainable around local democracy, and it is through governance that one can do this, and a real focus on that. It always surprises me at a national level. We often say we should have a written constitution. Well, there is part of our democracy where we do have constitutions, and they are councils. And I really encourage people who are struggling with cabinet systems, with abusive, frankly, sometimes strong leaders in place, or for people who want to think more sustainably, that thinking about your governance is actually fundamentally important, to provide a framework for the creation of potential, if you like. And the other thing I wanted to add was, I always quote Jacques Rancière, who's a French philosopher, who says there is no emancipatory institution. There is no emancipatory institution, because of course those institutions always ultimately want to act, you know, they have other agendas, and there are party agendas, and there are institutional agendas. And if there is no emancipatory institution, as communities and as citizens in working together, you have to be really strategic about when and how you then engage. We could have gone down the route of setting up some kind of party or some group of independents. We have many good independents who have stood over the years, and they routinely get their 250 votes, nowhere near a council place. We couldn't wait 5 years to get one councillor who would then be cut out of decision making, or 10 years to perhaps get a handful. We have to create the conditions in our institutions that protect representation. And I do believe, I mean, our 20,000 conversations have given a detailed agenda about how you can improve quite easily representation, participation, dealing with inequalities, openness and transparency, information sharing. We have a, you know, those 20,000 conversations, you know, created such a vibrant, dynamic agenda around the possibilities inherent in paying attention to governance. Because if you get a bad, you know, if you get a benign strong leader in place, that's great. But when they leave, you know, if you get a bad strong leader in place, you're stuck. It's exactly what's happening at a national level with the sucking of power up to Westminster. And at a local level in Sheffield, 10 councillors behind closed doors, we know best, at war with their communities. And that, you know, I could go on, of course I could, but I won't. I'll shut up now.
I think watch this space.
Yes, please do. Please, oh yes, please follow us on Twitter at It's Our City Chef, and have a look at our website, itsoursheffield.co.uk, or our Facebook group. Thank you.
We'll definitely do. Richard.
Yes, thanks, Nick. Look, I just want to thank everybody who's stuck around and followed it. I've really enjoyed it myself. I think this is our second one of this series. Both of them have been, we've crammed in a lot of people from a lot of different places, and we've got a load of testimony and just a massive amount of ideas and information that you'll be pleased to hear. It falls to me and Nick to process, because this is one of a series of 5 which we will use to inform what we're going to call the Manifesto for Civic Revival, which will be published next March. So if you didn't know what this was part of, or what the hell you got yourself involved with, that's the background. There's more information on the Civic Revival website. This particular event, I think, has been, you know, I've really enjoyed it. It's been put on with the cooperation of Flat Pack Democracy, who are a different organisation to us, and they are specifically in the game of helping groups of independents take over their councils and fight the May 2021 elections. So we have formed a really fruitful relationship with them. But we're doing, trying to work out some of the content of what Civic Revival might entail. And if you look at our website, you'll see the kind of things that we're interested in. And Fat Pack Democracies are interested in helping people like the people you've seen on the call, and if you're in the audience and you like what you've seen, helping you to get yourselves elected and take power and do the things you want to do in your community. So yes, so we did promise a kind of relaxed chat. So everybody who's been faithfully hung on for the sort of session, that's fine. I'm going to go back to Peter and Hastings, and if anybody wants to crack open a tin or a bottle or whatever and just have a stick around, you're free to leave, but you're free to just meet everybody in the Civic Revival team if you want to stick around for the next sort of 10-15 minutes or so. Yeah, so thanks everybody. That closes the formal part of the evening. Over to you, Peter, to host a little bit more informal chat.
Thanks, Richard. It might be just you and me. If everyone's as exhausted as I am after all that, they'll probably want to go and have a quiet chat, cup of tea on their own. But yeah, if anybody wants to stay and talk to us about anything in specifically or ask us questions, please do. I think, what have we got left? Is there anybody who hasn't been involved? I can't believe it. Everybody had a go, didn't they? There's 10 people here. I can see, let me drop down here to see who's here. Who has? Chris Dodwell, you haven't said anything. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, it's what I was trying to say last time. I think from Hastings and where we've actually we've got some what I think is a very good sort of model for this sort of type of community engagement, where we've been there's a group, White Rock Neighbourhood Ventures, that's been basically buying up property and trying to set up more a European model of rentals, and where that is taking over commercial property and using so it's mixed use, both residential and commercial, but with fixed rents and very good quality build, and with sort of unlimited leases as well, which is the most important bit. It's not a 6-month lease; it's a long-term lease. But it is one model which is actually is engaging huge numbers of people, and is actually being financially very successful. So much so that they've actually bought another building recently, and they've managed to get funding for over £6 million, which is starting sort of in the next few months. But it's yeah, I think my take on it is what you've been talking about. One of the issues is that about what's being asked of people is actually quite time consuming, and in some ways can be quite exhausting, because I've been involved in the Green Party and the Lib Dems in the past, and to actually do anything worthwhile, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it like wholeheartedly, 101%, although that's not possible. But it's actually just that commitment is actually very, very, it's a big ask of anyone. And I think that's the essential problem, is about how to get people involved and saying, well, look, we're not asking you this to take over your life, but yeah, get involved.
Thanks, Chris. It strikes me that's a bit of a compliment to what Ruth was saying. I buy everything she said about governance, yeah, but there is another set of structure which is valuable, which is the way in which people can take the destiny of particular projects in their own hands beyond the council. And the idea of asset-based projects, including even the ones with the private sector involvement, like Anne's in Gillingham, these things are anchors for the choppy waters that we're going through. And it's so nice when you know that a major piece of the town's infrastructure is in the hands of people who are not driven by profit or not subject to, pressures to do things with it, which are government-led, politically driven things. I'm with you, Anne. I mean, I'm a property owner, and it's quite weird. I think you might empathise with this. When people talk about property owners, they think of Westfield and Into and hideous organisations who I wouldn't want my name associated with in any circumstances. Whereas if people took the trouble to understand your journey and your reasons, you know, it would be so different, wouldn't it? I mean, the profit motive is there, has to be, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. But beyond that, your opportunities to do things are so different than if you're talking to the owner of the shopping centre.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, the word commercial has tended to become a dirty word. And what I do here has to be financially sustainable. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to stay here and continue doing the things that I'm doing. And at no stage of the game have I had any outside support, if you like. I don't have any grant funding. I don't, you know.
Can I ask a question, Anne?
Yes, sure.
So, I mean, I thought your point about, you know, I think Peter's still on the call from Horwich, so, but, you know, you get involved in local politics. I mean, you certainly think, right, that's it, you know, it does take over, as Chris said, and a lot of people avoid it on the grounds that that might happen. Now, the point that Susanna Rustin makes, and I've heard her say it elsewhere, is that if you're doing a lot of community projects, at some point, and I think Peter might say this is how he felt in Horwich, you think, well, I might as well get on the council, because the one thing Susanna says, which she didn't say tonight, which is we're trying to keep a youth club open, and we were disappointed in the way that the council was maintaining a local park, and you know and what they've been able to do with the by being a community council, they can set a rate. You know, they can set a precept of council tax, so they know the council collects it for them. So, you know, getting on the town council, the reason you want to do it is not because you want to get involved in politics or you want to, you know, become a kind of local big shot. It's literally that all your community work gets this guaranteed income, you know, which is the precept that you choose to set. And what she was saying is it kind of releases her as a community campaigner from having to raise money, to making sure it's spent more carefully and better, and things are done well. You know what I mean? So the youth club, instead of like, oh, the youth club's run out of money and doesn't raise money to keep it open, she's now in a situation where she knows for the next 5 years she's got enough money to run the youth club. So how are we going to make the most of the youth club? Do you see what I mean? And I just feel that's such a powerful message. And I just wondered if, you know, Gillingham Town Council, I mean, I'm not pushing you in any direction on this, but, you know, have you and your kind of gang who organised this community cafe thing, have you ever thought, well, if we ran the town council, we wouldn't have to worry about where the money was coming from to keep this service or that service open? We could do it and run it better. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, but I am not running a community cafe, I would say. It has become that, but that wasn't my aim. I should say that I am primarily an artist and a curator of contemporary art. That's what I do, it's what I'm trained to do. And I ended up with this building in which I created some space that I could show art, but also has offices, it's got flats, and now it's got this ground floor with this cafe in it. And my idea with the cafe was merely that the exhibitions I run bring people from a wide catchment area into the centre of the town. And when they come, they want a cup of coffee, and the only places they can go are Waitrose and a Costa up the road, neither of which are particularly great. And I wanted people to stay longer in the building. It's in a conservation area in the town. It's the most attractive part of the town. I wanted them to come and enjoy their stay. What's happened is that partly because of COVID, I opened the cafe in a very low-key way, and I wanted local people to be involved in the cafe. So when I was starting the renovation work on the ground floor, I kept the doors open. I didn't paint the windows white to stop people seeing what was going on. I opened the doors, let them in, let them have a look around, said, what do you think we should do with this space? I have to say it's one of the largest spaces in the centre of the town. So it's significant for people. So they were coming in with all sorts of ideas. And some of, you know, a lot of those ideas were good ones, but it also gave me the chance to actually say to them, well, how would you feel if I did this? Would you come if I did that? You know, so it was a bit of a marketing exercise. It wasn't, you know, entirely altruistic.
And they're very lucky to have you.
And I'll tell you something else about Civic Revival, Anne. When we set this damn thing up, the whole purpose of Civic Revival was to say, right, and me, Peter, and Chris Dodwell and Nick, we're coming to see you next week, you know.
Please, no, you must come. I mean,
we'll have to wait till and we got locked down as soon as we got going.
Yeah.
The plan was to go and bloody visit places and take people from different places.
Richard,
take Peter from Norwich and get him into Dorset. You know,
we'll
we
be
never
going there. Look, tell you what, we're going to, Richard and Anne, we're going to write this manifesto with a lot of the material we're gathering at these events, and we'll go on the road and we'll write a chapter sitting in your cafe. And
the best coffee.
I'm determined that one of the chapters will cover the interaction with small business and people who do things not for a commercial view and not for a political view, but simply because they enjoy looking after some buildings and offering a service. And we've got a lot in Hastings. You should come and see us, actually.
I'd love to.
I'm spoilt for choice of places to go for coffee with Chris, because Chris and I both live in Hastings. And Chris, that's true, isn't it? We meet occasionally for a coffee. We can go to Hanushka, we can go to St Mary in the Castle, we can go to, where else do we go? We do go to Nero sometimes, but
outside Jemson's.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we're lucky here, and I think most places that are flourishing, I'm sure there's some nice ones in Frome, it's a key ingredient to have somewhere that is warm, welcoming, and well disposed to the sort of conversations that we've been having tonight.
Absolutely.